This is CSAP Science and Policy Podcast, where we're bringing you the latest evidence and expertise to improve public policy making. This week, we're proud to present a bonus episode on innovation in the context of COVID-19, which features content from our 2020 virtual annual conference. This episode has been guest hosted by Dr. David Cleevely.
So we're going to be talking about accelerating innovation. And I just want to give a little bit of a backdrop to this, thinking about why we might want to accelerate innovation. There's been quite a lot of debate as to whether innovation is actually slowing up, but also some concerns about slow productivity growth, particularly in the Western economies. Are we seeing less production from people per hour, or not the same improvements that we saw during the 50s and 60s and 70s? And that then has obvious repercussions to benefits for the quality of life and the economic prosperity of countries, particularly the UK, where that slow up in productivity as growth has been quite marked. And specific challenges such as climate change, we are going to have to accelerate the way in which we innovate in order to be able to deal with the challenge of climate change, and because we've got very little time left. So we have some pretty big questions to consider. I just have to give a bit more of a framing to this. I mean, innovation doesn't happen everywhere in the economy at the same rate. Do we need to think about specific sectors? Hairdressing might be rather different to, although hairdressing might have undergone some considerable innovation during lockdown, but it's a different matter compared to aerospace or web apps. What kind of education and training do we need if we're going to accelerate innovation? And what about governments? Typically, they're 40, 45, even 50% of the economy. What role should they play, and how could we make that happen? And how do we ensure that investment flows to where it's needed? There's no point in somebody inventing something in their shed if it can't actually be invested in and turned into something reasonable. And we need to understand more about how innovation actually happens. Does it thrive on disruption and competition? In which case is that where we should be putting our policies? Why are some places and some companies more innovative than others? Do we know what makes things innovative? Do we know how they translate those into real action? And is it money that's needed, or is it a change in culture to be able to do that? Now, we've got three brilliant speakers here today. I'm very, very pleased to see them all. Houghton, who's the Chief Executive of the Royal Academy of Engineering, who studied biochemistry at another place, and has had a spectacular career in the Royal Academy of Engineering with many successes, including the Enterprise Hub, which as Rob mentioned, I'm lucky enough to chair. Was named in Computer Weekly's 50 most influential women in UK tech, and was awarded a CBE in the 2020 New Year's Honours List. I'm very pleased to see you, Houghton. Rob Miller, who's the director of the Whittle Lab, author of over 70 papers on efficiency energy production, a champion of rapid innovation, and he's led projects that have broken new ground in rapid prototyping and implementation. And then finally, George Freeman, who's the MP for Mid-Norfolk, who's played a really very significant role in innovation policy in government. In the last 6 years, he's occupied posts as the Minister for the Future of Transport. He's chaired the Prime Minister's Policy Board and has been Minister for Life Sciences, Digital Health and Agritech, though not all at the same time, as far as I'm aware, George. You've done them sequentially. But anyway, very pleased to see everybody here. And I think I'm going to invite Houghton to speak first.
Thank you very much indeed, David, and very excited to be here. Innovation is a topic that we're passionate about at the Royal Academy of Engineering. And as part of what we called our COVID Positive Response Programme, we decided to take a look at what we could learn from the experience of some of the people who've been at the heart of the extraordinarily rapid innovation that's been taking place during the pandemic. And we did that through a series of seminars called Innovation in a Crisis. When systems act under pressure, they're stress tested. You can learn about what you need to do to boost their resilience, but you can also learn some really valuable lessons that you can take back into business as usual operations. So I thought I'd share with you some of the headline learnings about rapid innovation that have emerged from those discussions. And I should say that for innovation in a crisis, we've taken a holistic view of what innovation is. So in addition to new stuff, new products, services, we've looked at rapid scaling and retrofitting of existing devices. all of which have drawn on innovation. And we've covered various aspects, ranging from the delivery of the Nightingale field hospitals through to the manufacture of ventilators and also breathing aids. So we've boiled down the insights from these diverse examples into 4 key areas that have emerged as critical success factors across all of those case studies. The first topic I want to talk about is the critical importance of having a clear, compelling goal that people can unite around. For all the damage that COVID has caused, arguably because of the damage that it's caused, it's had an incredibly strong galvanizing effect on many of the people who've been involved in the response to it, including innovators. And our speakers came back time and time again to the power of having a unifying vision that everybody believed in. It helped to engender a sense of purpose and resolve, and also in a very practical way, it anchored the project management discipline around a very tangible endpoint, around a tangible deliverable. And that clarity of purpose also helped the innovators that we spoke to strip out the unnecessary, the superfluous, so that they could have an almost ruthless focus on the endpoint of that innovation. And they told us that that was essential to be able to work at the pace that they managed to achieve. So secondly, and this is going to come as no surprise to anybody, I'm sure, people were absolutely key. Usually we take time to build trust and understanding among colleagues. We take time to get to know each other's strengths and weaknesses. But of course, innovation in a crisis doesn't have the luxury of time. So assembling teams where people had real respect for each other's professional capability and where they were confident that everybody brought something concrete, something important, something complementary to the table was absolutely essential. And interestingly, many of the innovative projects that have been delivered through COVID have actually been built around extraordinary generosity, with companies sometimes actually donating the entire expert workforce that they had to support the COVID response. That people power combined with the pull of the goal that we just discussed also resulted in some incredible collaborations that between a whole range of companies and organisations. And for me, that's been one of the real revelations about COVID, has been our ability to rapidly assemble these complex but yet very effective collaborations between companies large and small, across competitor and sector boundaries, together with researchers, together with government, together with regulators. And that surely must provide a hint to how we can accelerate innovation in less extreme conditions as well. My third point is that the very taxing timelines and the constraints under which people were working forced them to look for opportunities to self-disrupt. So what do I mean by self-disrupt? Well, it involved learning lessons from other sectors. It involved failing fast and moving on quickly. We heard big corporates like Ford behaving more like agile startups at times. We heard construction companies drawing on both the military and tech sectors in terms of both culture and process to help them be more effective in delivering the Nightingale hospitals. And I really love the example here from Dick Elsey at the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, who led the Ventilator Challenge UK consortium. And he described how they were faced with this extraordinary challenge of training something like 3,000 people in a massively compressed timeline, and of course, under stringent social distancing requirements. But with some excellent support, including from Microsoft, they were able to use augmented reality and virtual reality as alternative delivery mechanisms for that training, and it really worked. And in fact, that whole project is a great exemplar of using digital twins and other industrial digital tools to massively expedite the innovation and scale-up process. And I really do think that there's a lot we can learn from that would apply to other sectors and other contexts. So finally, I want to give a shout out to our sometimes maligned partners in government and regulators who have actually moved at a pace, and I do apologise for using the word, that is unprecedented during this COVID experience. The Ventilator Challenge UK also worked with regulators extremely intensively to compress the timeline for approval from 6 months to 21 days. Regulators can be a rate-limiting step in innovation, and that's not always a bad thing. Even in this crisis, they've played an important role in killing off, frankly, some of the less sensible ideas that have been advanced. And I really hope that we can look at how the accelerated timelines and more collaborative approaches that we've experienced in these COVID times by both regulators and also public procurers can be retained and carried forward into our future behaviours. So in closing, I think that out of this grim crisis created by COVID, we've actually learned that we can innovate at a pace that exceeds what many of us believed was possible. Factors that have enabled that include alignment around a really strong, clear, compelling goal that everybody believes in. They involve bringing multidisciplinary, talented teams together and making the most of what collaboration can offer. They involve challenging ourselves to self-disrupt, to execute, learn, fail fast when needed, and to make regulation and procurement enabling forces rather than brakes on innovation. And we now need to take those proof points that's shown us what's possible and find ways to integrate the behaviours and the approaches that drove those successful examples of innovating in a crisis into our ways of working over the longer term and across a broader swathe of our economy. Thank you very much.
Houghton, that's absolutely brilliant. In my little role that I played as chair of the triage committee for COVID for the Royal Academy of Engineering, I've seen some of that in action, and I think you've just given the most absolutely perfect summary of what we saw. How we bottle that, how we actually implement that in the future, I don't know. I mean, it would be hard if we had to deal with crisis after crisis in order to keep that going. But let's see where the discussion takes us. But in terms of, that's a great segue into Rob's talk, I think, because Rob, you effectively have to do this day after day at the Whittle Lab. Over to you.
Thank you, David. I'm going to give you an example today of how we are accelerating technology development in aerospace, and this is specifically for the aim of achieving zero carbon flight, or accelerating the process of achieving zero carbon flight. To give you a bit of background to the Whittle Lab, we're now the Rolls-Royce Global Research Centre in aerodynamics. We're the Global Research Centre for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. We work with them for the last 50 years. Siemens in Lincoln and Newcastle, and Dyson more recently in Malmesbury. If you saw the launch of James Dyson's V10, you'll see his shout out to the Whittle Lab. This has resulted in the Whittle Lab bringing in about 10% of the university's total income, and many people say that sort of doing so much industrially focused work is not good for academic research, but in our case, it's resulted in us becoming the world's most academically successful propulsion and power lab, winning 9 of the last 13 of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers' top award in the field, the Gas Turbine Award. So the aviation sector, as we all know, is slow to innovate. And I would argue it doesn't have to be this way. And so about 7 years ago, we set out with the aim of seeing if we could reduce that by not just a small margin, but by a factor of 10. If we could ramp up more quickly, but we could also test out more ideas and therefore get to a better product. We honestly believe that the winners in a zero carbon world will be companies and countries who can adapt to technology change more quickly and have this capability. So there's a story here. So about 7 years ago, when we were starting to think about this, I was out in the pub with a chap called Tony Dickens, who was a chief aero tester at Red Bull Formula One. And Tony said to me, it was a Thursday night, Tony said, "What are you doing at the moment, Rob?" And I said, "Well, we've just developed the second generation of 3D compressor blades for Rolls." And I explained them, and he thought it was brilliant. And then he said to me, "When will they make engine?" And I said, 6 years, 10 years. So we sort of felt sad about that. And I turned to Tony and said, "What did you do today, Tony?" And he said, "We tested 20 rear wings in the wind tunnel. We don't understand how they work, but we fitted a surface through them, predicted the best. We built it. It was the best." This was a Thursday night, and he just emailed it to Track. And by Track, Red Bull had a row of printers, and that would go on for practice the next day. And at that moment, the penny dropped for both of us. So I'll give you some of the key things we've learned. So the key to this is small, sharp, focused teams. And this helps to break down natural human communication barriers. It allows the teams to work intuitively. They're always a mixture of skills. They're always a mixture of industry and academia. Removal of top-down management and bureaucracy encourages bold, fast action. So normal ways of managing innovation really and funding innovation really restrict the process. You need to give the teams clear goals and then allow them to change multiple times direction, maybe hundreds of times, changing the question they're asking to find the right question. You also need to give them the right tools. So you have an idea, you design it, you make it, you test it. And we've gone around this whole process. We've used AI and augmented-based design systems running on graphics processors, which have speeded up the design process by about a factor of 100. 3D printing in terms of manufacture is good, but really the key here is owning the supply chain. So we moved the supply chain in-house and coupled it directly to the design system. This took the manufacture down from months to 8 hours. The test facilities themselves, we do a value stream analysis like it's a baked bean production line, and we strip out about 95% of the processes. We're on about the 4th generation of this. We first got down testing times from months to about a day, and now with the PIC team, we can do it in about 15 minutes. Now, to show this, we had a formal trial in 2017 run with Rolls-Royce, funded by the Aerospace Technology Institute, and we took 4 technologies around this loop in less than a week, about 4 days. And this had taken us 2 years back in 2005, and we're pretty good at it. So that's 100 times faster. And to sort of sum this up, what we find is, humans have a natural time scale. On a Monday morning, you wake up, you're positive. If you can get that good idea tested out within a week, innovation in your lab explodes. And that is absolutely key. So how do you scale this process? Well, we spent the last few years on working with our industrial partners. This is the new Whittle Laboratory and the National Centre of Propulsion and Power. We have embedded industrial offices in here and challenge spaces, which allow us to connect with all our partners across the UK and expand to new partners and SMEs. We also house the EPSERC Centre of Doctoral Training in Future Power and Propulsion. So every aerospace and power generation student from Oxford, Loughborough and Cambridge spend a year in this lab. We have new workshops and rapid manufacture facilities, and then we have a rapid test capability, which scales to about 80% of UK's future need. So I'm sorry for the plug at the end, but the total cost of this project is 48.5 million. We have half that money raised from industry and the Aerospace Technology Institute. The project is ready to break ground in 2020. We need 25 million more to make this happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. I'm still astonished at the rate at which you are able to get round that loop and how fast you've managed to compress things. Not so much when I hear about the kind of form filling that some of these companies have had to go through in order to get innovation investment approved. George, you of course you instantly recognise all these processes from government, or at least the attempt to get these things sorted out in government. Of course, government has a completely different view about risk, and civil servants are always thinking about the National Audit Office. I'm sure you've got a lot to add to this. George, welcome.
Thank you to Rob and Houghton for a brilliant opener. Look, my perspective, just to show you where I'm coming from, the 15 years working in biomed and agri and clean tech venture capital, where what we were doing was innovation, but we didn't publish innovation brochures all the time. We tried to raise money, back teams, create companies, create value that could go global. And then in 2010, joining the government, I'm a big supporter of an activist industrial strategy and have helped to try and bring the Conservative Party from a sort of dirigiste, small state, hands-off mode to thinking that this globalization, 21st century technology revolution necessitates, merits an activist industrial strategy. David Cameron quickly appointed me as government life science advisor. I was pushing a broader agenda around food, medicine, and energy for 3 pillars: the bioscience, the life science, the science of life, and that Britain should have a bioeconomy strategy and a biosecurity strategy. And that if we're really going to lead in the 21st century growth sector, that would be a big area where we've got huge opportunity, but we haven't really commercialized it properly. I just want to say 3 things, really. 1, why does this matter now so much? 2, some reflections on why government tends to get this wrong and some lessons on where it's got it right. And then some provocative thoughts on what we might want to do to try and tackle it. And firstly, I think what we're seeing in the country is quite a deep rejection of a rather shallow, insecure model of a service economy. Basically, the UK as a sort of cappuccino headquarters of a European manufacturing market. And people want to belong to something a bit more than a sort of high city, high finance, housing, consumer and service economy. And I think there's a deep yearning. There's a yearning to be part of an economy that is doing something more inspiring, something more noble, something more productive, something more generative of revenue, particularly if they might even see a little bit of it back on their town or high street and community. And that's why I've been banging the drum so hard for government to adopt a much bolder vision of Britain as an innovation nation. And what I mean by that is private and public sector, particularly public sector, committed to putting the concept of innovation and enterprise at the heart of the public sector. Now, that's a radical idea because most people on conservative side assume that the private sector is innovative and the public sector is fundamentally not, and it's there to sort of regulate and sort of keep out. I couldn't disagree more. I think the public sector is highly innovative. So I believe deeply in public sector enterprise. I don't mean privatization. I mean freeing up and incentivizing in the public sector people and organizations to be more entrepreneurial. And I think it's key for several things. Firstly, growth. We're now saddled with debt. However much you try and trim and cut and control spending, growth is the only thing that's going to get us out of this generational debt crisis. And that can't just be house building and consumerism and shopping. It's got to be big growth in scaled, high growth companies and sectors that generate quality jobs. Secondly, innovation is completely key to reform in the public sector, both for efficiency, but also for better services. I mean, when I was Minister for Life Science, I was struck that how much opposition there was to the idea of sort of digital health, because no one trusts government to get it right, and you can see why. But when you start to say, are you happy that we're running an NHS system where your patient records are on paper and cardboard, stored in 10 miles of warehousing with paper clips and treasury tags in each hospital? People are appalled, and rightly so. If you really want to deliver modern healthcare, you've got to have a digital health record and proper seamless integrated pathways. It's fundamental to our productivity crisis, but I'd argue something even more than that. It's fundamental, I think, to a renewed sense of empowerment. So I want to argue that an innovation nation is key, not just for pure bottom line revenues, but a much more profound moment of renewal for our society and our economy. Second, the problem. Well, I would argue that the people of this country and the grassroots culture and institutions of this country are actually very good at innovation, but we are terrible at commercializing it at scale and taking it global. And secondly, our government has been very busy issuing brochures and documents and strategies to show how much it wants to do innovation, but has actually not been very good at tackling the core problem of making sure that we don't just do science, but we commercialize and enhance, drive it through the public sector, use the public sector procurement to make Britain a test bed, a crucible for great innovation that we then globally transfer commercially and philanthropically. So one of the things about innovation is people. It's quite difficult to do innovation with uninnovative people. We have a problem in our system of government that innovators are quite threatening and quite challenging, and they tend not to get to the top of the greasy pole, both on the civil service side and on the elected side. So, last section, I want to suggest that the traditional government paradigm, the reason we get this wrong is that we tend to think it's all about the announcement. I mean, we've actually got to a stage now where the government machines sort of think when the announcement, capital A, has been made, the grid slot's been won and the announcement's been made, job done. And that always involves, it doesn't mean anything, of course, unless there's a bit of money handed out. And then it tends to think there's got to be a document, a strategy. So as long as you've got an announcement, you've handed out some money and you've got a document, job done. It is all very much shaped as a top-down initiative because all of us, ministers, are guilty of we want to look in control, we want to look busy, we want to look on it. So the paradigm is very top-down and they scrabble around for ideas from in the last minute. Anyone got any good ideas for something that we could put in our strategy? Tends to be very focused on science, which is not the same as innovation. So the machine tends to go, oh, we want to make a big commitment to do something. So let's give a big sum of money and the conversation tends to be captive by the sort of big academic institutes that are used to taking quite big chunks of money. It doesn't tend to be, who are the innovators in this space? Who are the little companies? Who are the funders? Who are the investors? Let's get them around a table and find out how we could best help their ecosystem to develop. It tends to be very fragmented. So you get strategies from Bay, strategies from health, strategies from number 10, number 11. And down on the ground in the communities of interest, it's hugely fragmented. And what looks from London like a lot of announcements and money looks at the bottom like a lot of announcements and confusion. And then most importantly of all, the machine tends then to think it's all about institutions, bureaucratic accountability back up to ministers. What have you done? Rather than empowering people on the ground. At the top of government, to be fair to people, they're dealing with huge responsibilities and forensic cross-examination for the 1,000,001 organisations that want to trip people up. And the fear is, understandably, what happens if we ended up in front of the select committee? Somebody managed to point out that we'd done something that wasn't entirely in accordance with every bit of protocol. So the innovative culture at the top of government is a real challenge. We've got to find literally a mechanism for ministers to be able to say, this is part of our innovation strategy. And there's a very clear end goal and vision, but a freedom and a permission to do things rather differently. I close with this. If we really wanted to make a difference, I think clear vision, clear goal, focus on empowering the risk takers, incentivizing success, and radical idea. What about if government allowed the successful innovators to keep a little bit of the proceeds of both the success and the saving that they generate? And that was the thinking I tried to put into the Biomedical Catalyst Fund. Government wanted to announce £1 billion life science fund when I arrived. I said, please don't. The Catalyst Fund provided 50-50 match funding for a decent inventor who, with a commercial interest and a patentable thing, very early stage, 5 ticks. It was based on the old SMART award model. But fundamentally, this is about a culture change, and it's got to come from the top. And it's got to be about empowering and incentivizing people who actually take risk all the way through the system.
Great. Thank you, George. Now, we have very little time, and I've got a couple more topics that I just want to go to. One, which is about different kinds of innovation, because we've been talking about innovation as if, we need to set a goal for getting to the moon or something like that. But in my book, in the stuff that I've done in many companies, a lot of the stuff has been incremental, small changes. Kaizen, as the Japanese would say, the little frog jumps that actually taken step by step by step give you innovation. And when you look at it over a period of years, you can perform miracles. How much of that do you think we need to incorporate into our thinking about the way in which we do innovation? Rob, first.
I spent a lot of time in Japan working with Mitsubishi and also Siemens in Germany and Rolls-Royce in the UK. And it's really interesting. When you show an innovative idea or piece of technology that's going to improve something, the first question which somebody in the UK will ask you will be, can we afford it? Is it worth doing? And they will do in their heads a little bit of economic analysis, which is not economics really. And you usually end up in a decision not to do it. Whereas when I've worked with the Japanese, they will look at the quality of the idea and the perfection it brings to the end product. And they'll quite often pursue things without any discussion. Now, at the top level, the Japanese companies are still making very economic decisions on the product, brutally economic decisions. But on the local level, this pseudo-economics has not penetrated and gives the team this idea of perfection rather than pseudo-economics.
Yeah, that's a very important point. In fact, David Sainsbury picks it up in his book when he's criticized about innovation, the windows of opportunity. And he talks about the way in which neoclassical economics has led us into a trap of believing that actually all competition is based on price, which it isn't.
So if you want to make Rolls-Royce jet engines better in the future, you need graduate engineers from good universities to bet their whole career on making the hot end turbine better. Now, if they made an economic decision anywhere along that journey about what would make them richer personally, they wouldn't be doing it. The incentives, the economic decisions are not right.
I think that's a very important point. And I'm going to then bring on to the last question, which is about the role of regulations in all of this. And I think Steve Chu, when he was Secretary at Energy in the United States, and one of the things he said, when it came to hairdryers used to be big, bulky, expensive, and they used to have a lot of energy, right? The regulations on hairdryers changed. And almost overnight, within 18 months, hairdryers have become lightweight, low energy, much easier to handle. Actually, consumers like them better, and regulation had pushed the market in the correct direction. Now, Houghton, you talked about regulation and its role in all of this. It's a two-edged sword. what do you think? How do we make this work?
Yeah, so I think I was talking in the context of COVID, and I think I guess it's the urgency creates clarity of focus, and a lot of the time, what has flown through the regulatory process has been smart repurposing or adaptation of relatively well-known technologies. So it's easy to expedite a regulatory process when actually, if you strip it out, you've got a good evidence base for the effectiveness and safety of the particular approach you're trying, and all you're doing is modifying that. And actually just saying, as a general rule, if that's what people are doing, could we make it as smooth and possible would be great. And I'm sure that is the intention, but maybe not always the experience. On the other hand, I think if you look at some of the massively disruptive technologies there, we've got almost a co-creation process that's going to happen, where the UK has an opportunity, for example, in the context of living labs, to deploy existing infrastructure at scale, whether it's a disused airfield or it's an NHS hospital, to allow innovators together with users and regulators to learn, to go through a kind of shared learning, collaborative learning experience, to understand how these technologies behave in real world environments, and to start thinking how that should then shape the regulatory environment. I think that's fundamentally different from the sorts of, rapid approval of a CPAP device. So I feel that the UK is dabbling in this. There are good examples which we can feel proud of, but there's still a lot of headroom to do more on this. And I think the notion of creating more living labs, communities around which we can practice disruptive technologies in the real world in a way that informs our regulatory experience, as well as making it, expediting the time to market for these technologies, is something that there is scope to do lots more of. But there's so much more opportunity. And the UK is actually incredibly innovation asset dense nation. We're quite small. We've got a lot of useful physical infrastructure we could make more of, and that in itself could become a great marketing point for the UK.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think that the role of regulation in doing these things could open up an awful lot of stuff. I think this has been an extraordinary session in the way that we've covered a vast amount of ground. There's grounds for optimism. I think the idea that actually we're in the middle of some creative destruction, which we need to seize. And I just want to thank you all for a terrific session. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you very much to all the contributors. And I hope you've enjoyed the session. Thank you very much indeed.
CSAP Science and Policy Podcast is a production of the Centre for Science and Policy at the University of Cambridge. This episode was hosted by Dr. David Cleevely and was produced by me, Kate McNeil. Our guests this week were Professor Robert Miller, Dr. Houghton Salim, and George Freeman. You can learn more about CSAP's work by visiting us on Twitter at CSciPol, or by visiting our website at www.csap.cam.ac.uk. If you have feedback about this episode or questions you'd like us to address in a future week, please email inquiries@csap.cam.ac.uk. Thanks for listening.